rise above the fear? Can we learn to see the need? Can we share humanity? I can see another day come. Broken people, we can be made whole. We can be made whole. We can be made whole as we lay down our weapons, open up our hearts. Love is breaking us, love remaking us. Will we ever rise? Will we ever rise above the pain? Can we learn another way? Forgive as you forgave. I can see another day come. Broken people, we can be made whole. We can be made whole. We can be made whole as we lay down our weapons, open up our hearts. Love is breaking us, love remaking us. Come here now, take away the blindness so we can see what we were meant to see. I feel light devastating darkness, for I can see another day come. I can see another day come. Broken people, we can be made whole. Broken people, we can be made whole. Broken people, we can be made whole. We can be made whole. We can be made whole as we lay down our weapons, open up our hearts. Love is breaking us, love remaking us. Will we ever rise? Will we ever rise?
Last week, during our journey through the Bible, we I like this thing anyway. It gives me something to hide behind. We talked about the story of the giving of the law, right? As we're moving through Genesis, now we're in Exodus. We're at the point where Moses receives the law on the mountain. And we recognized that this law was a big step forward for humanity, because as we compared it to the other law codes around it, we saw that it was the most forward-thinking, the most ambitious, the most progressive document for its time. A document that tried to inscribe not just justice, but even mercy into the very order of the universe. That's a pretty cool idea. And I made the point that just as human cultures have grown and changed, so also we as communities, societies, and even individuals grow and change. And that to look back on yourself and judge yourself for your past isn't healthy, and it won't get you anywhere. It'll either bring you into crippling guilt or cynicism or other ways of thinking that will take you out of the present and won't allow you to move into the future. But as I also said, and I said this briefly, I'll talk about it a little more today, even though we don't look back on our past and judge it with guilt and cynicism, we also don't look back with nostalgia. We don't try to embrace it with fondness or think that it was better than it was now. It's okay to say that something in your past was bad, right? It's okay to recognize something as evil. Absolutely. Something in the past of yourself or in a nation's past or in a community's past, there are bad things in the world. But embracing them means realizing they're there, analyzing them, and learning from them, as opposed to either repressing or clinging. So today we're going to do that a little bit with the law. We're going to analyze it, we're going to learn from it, and we're going to embrace it. And we'll realize in that it's not just something that we want to go back towards, but it's also not something that's worthless or valueless. And we'll look to, at the end, the words of Jesus to help us understand a little more what this might look like. These stories have power. These ancient stories are extremely powerful. Power to do what, though? Like, when I say that, what do I mean? Why are we even here? What's the point of gathering together? What are we expecting to find in the Bible? I ask myself that question with sincere earnestness very often. Week after week, you all come here. And every week I'm a little bit surprised. Every week. What are you looking for? What do you expect to find? Sometimes I doubt whether what I'm going to find in the Old Testament is something that's actually going to change me or pull me into a new world. But then I'm always pulled back to it again and again. I was talking to a friend this week, a new friend I made. Amazing woman. She runs the Sustainable Living Project, the community garden in the area. She was telling about this lecture she was listening to, and this guy in giving this lecture made the point that the Old Testament, and many old stories, but it seems to happen even stronger with the Bible, they're distilled, right? They're thousands of years old. They've been passed down again and again verbally, finally written down, then edited, compiled. And we realize that every word that's there ends up being important. Because after all these redactions, after all this editing, we realize that, hey, if it made it this far, it's powerful. I love the idea of distilled, right? These are high-proof texts. These are texts that we look at them, and there's only about this much, but if you shoot it, you get a big dose of humanity. They're distilled. That's why they're so formative. They're potent. There's a basic humanity that resonates with us every time we hear them. So there's two ways we need to talk about this, coming to these stories, and particularly coming to these passages on the law of Moses. We look at them historically and critically, and we look at them theologically. We ask the questions, how did they arise? How did the context around them form them? Where did these ideas find their source? And then we ask, what further meanings are imposed on them, and what meanings do we impose and pull out of them? There's a passage in Deuteronomy, and this theme occurs in Exodus as well, and I believe in Leviticus. But it's most explicit in Deuteronomy, and it's very telling for us as we look at it, as we begin to understand the function of the law for ancient Israel. It says, if you pay attention to these laws, this is from Deuteronomy 7, kind of the introduction to the code, and are careful to follow them, then the Lord your God will keep his covenant of love with you, as he swore to your ancestors. He will love you and bless you and increase your numbers. He will bless the fruit of your womb, the crops of your land, your grain, your wine, your olive oil, the calves of your herds, and the lambs of your flocks in the land he swore to your ancestors to give you. You will be more blessed than any other people. None of your men or women will be childless, nor will any of your livestock be without young. The Lord will keep you free from every disease. He will not inflict on you the horrible diseases you knew in Egypt. Humanity is very unique. We're unique on this planet in the sense that we have a sense of our own finitude. We know we're not infinite. We know we're not capable of Being infinite? I don't know what I was going to say after that. We know we're small. We know we don't have control over all of our lives. We know that there is greatness and immensity beyond ourselves. Small, funny example. I was at the beach yesterday, and there was the waves, it was over near Anna Maria Island, and the waves were really big for West Coast, like really powerful. And people were trying to body surf and stuff, and there was this guy out there, and he was body surfing, and no boogie board, just body surfing, right? And he was like trying to hit the wave, let it take him to shore. And he was an older gentleman, and I know that some of you laugh when I say things are like older because I'm so young. But he was probably twice as old as me at least. And he was a little bit, no, I know. Okay, all right. He was a little bit, he was also about 2.5 times my size, okay? Just picture it. So he's like, the waves are actually taking him in. It's pretty cool to watch. Well, he got tired, and I was actually worried about him because I noticed he was crawling on the ground. I was like, oh no, is this man having a heart attack? And these two other women, they were there too, and they were like, do you need help, sir? Like, they were trying to help him up. He's like, no, I got it. And he's just crawling. And it was like, such a pitiful, moving thing to see, this grown man like crawling on the ground. And he's like, I got it. Well, this huge wave comes, just huge, and just knocks him over, and literally, he rolls 5 or 6 times. Like, okay, at least twice my size, you picture this, and this wave just takes him like he's nothing. Rolls him over the rocks. I felt so sorry for him. Well, my point in saying that is like, even, this guy probably has some like great high-paying job, very important in the world perhaps, but the waves don't care. The chaos of the sea, nothing. This guy is nothing to nature, nothing to the universe. We know this about ourselves. We sense it. We know that at any moment a loved one could be taken from us through no fault of their own or ours. A car accident could take your life today. We know that it's possible to lose a source of income, and our lives will be drastically changed from the immensity of that. We know that a hurricane could hit where we live. To be human is to live on the border of chaos and order at all times, and to walk this line. Because we also know that there is order. We also know that our lives are fairly regular. We can make plans. We can schedule things. Because by and large, things go on the way they've gone on. So we can see weather patterns, and we can anticipate what's going to happen next, and we can plan accordingly for those things. But we also live with the anxiety knowing that those things ultimately are out of our control. And beyond even the chaos of nature, we feel there's more even than that. The immensity of the universe and whatever can be beyond that. And to this sense of the infinite, we're forced to relate as human beings. That's what makes us different. An elephant is finite. An elephant is not all-powerful or infinite. But it doesn't really know it. And it doesn't have the anxiety of walking the line between chaos and order as a human being does. The difference is that we relate to the infinite. We feel the infinite and know we have a place within it. And of course, biblically and in our Christian tradition, we say we relate to God. But humans haven't always understood this relation to the infinite as you and I have, right? There's all kinds of different understandings. In fact, early on in humanity, as all the threat of chaos, disease, hurricanes, unknown violence from a random person, threatened to undo communities, societies, and even the species at large, humans began to name these various forces of chaos and give them human natures. And so they had these vast pantheons of gods. And the idea was, look, we know we walk the line between chaos and order at all times, and at any moment it could come crashing down around us. But if we give human traits to those forces of chaos, perhaps we can make them happy. Perhaps they can keep order happening for us more than not. Perhaps if we do their will or sacrifice to them, they'll keep things good for us. That's exactly how early religion developed and functioned. And the Hebrew people functioned very similarly to this. We can see this introduction in Deuteronomy, right? If you keep my laws, if you do what I say. What was the promise? Your crops will grow successfully. Your women will be fertile. Your animals will be fertile. Your tribe will be safe from invaders. And you will not have the diseases of the Egyptians. All the laws that we see in the Old Testament play into one of those categories in one way or another. We see that in the laws, they pretty much follow one of these four: disease prevention, societal order, tribal identity, and violence deterrent. As the threat of chaos becomes inscribed into the divine realm, it's given ultimate importance. And so we see that it affects all areas of life, and we can live different ways in order to assuage the chaos. It brings us into the first category, disease prevention. You know, there's a lot of laws in the Old Testament about food, right? Don't eat this, don't eat that, don't eat that. And as we look at it scientifically, we say, well, you know, pork actually isn't worse than any other meat. It has a higher fat content, but studies show the germs aren't any worse. Just as dangerous to eat beef. It's not very dangerous to eat certain kinds of fish, not other kinds of fish. You can eat ostrich, right? Have you ever had an ostrich burger? It's not actually dangerous, not scientifically dangerous, right? So why is it for the Hebrew people that it was unclean or thought to bring disease? All of this flows from the idea of order and chaos, the things we always walk between as human beings. So, for the people of the Hebrew people, they see Genesis 1 as this forming narrative, right? And you have all these categories of animals, and they all belong in a certain category of nature. So the sky has birds, and the land has animals, and the sea has fish. Well, if there's an animal that doesn't quite fit its category correctly, like a bird that walks, or a fish without scales, or an animal who burrows into the earth instead of living on top of it, or a livestock type animal that doesn't have hooves, right? These animals are odd. They're outside the created order. And so they're deemed unclean. It might seem weird to us, like looking at it from a scientific medical perspective, but it's not really strange when your society is built on stories of chaos and order. It makes perfect sense. Then we see laws about the reduction of violence. You've heard the idea, and it occurs multiple times in Exodus, Leviticus, and Deuteronomy, that an injury given to someone must be returned in like manner, right? So eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, broken bone for broken bone. This occurs more than once in the law codes. The idea behind this is you can't go out of control with your retribution. Someone can't be killed for hurting someone. You can't kill another person's family for hurting you, right? You can't mass incarcerate a group of young males and take away the prime of their life for minor drug charges. That's the idea, right? You can't go overboard in your retribution because it could crush somebody. So there's two laws I want to highlight here. The first comes from Exodus chapter 22. And it says, if a thief is caught breaking in at night and is struck a fatal blow, the defender is not guilty of bloodshed. But if it happens after sunrise, the defender is guilty of bloodshed. First of all, no other law code in the ancient Near East did not have the death penalty for thievery, theft. If you took something, you're killed, most likely, or maimed. In the Old Testament, the only ever retribution is you have to pay the person back. If you steal something, you pay him what you stole. This is a big step forward. But beyond that, think about this. This is the beginning of a section of what to do to the thief, right? So there is retribution that follows this first, but the very first thing that happens in discussing theft is the rights of the thief. If you see them in broad daylight, right? If it's dark, remember, no electricity in this time. If it's dark and you hear something in your house and you grab a pot and you just start swinging because you don't know what's happening and someone might be able to kill you, and you kill the person, well, you didn't know what was happening. You didn't know they just needed food. But if it's broad daylight, someone comes to your house and they're stealing, and you kill them just because you want to teach them a lesson, or they don't, you're mad that they're stealing from you, you're guilty of bloodshed. That person's just trying to get something to eat. In fact, we see this expounded even more. In Deuteronomy, it says that there shouldn't even be theft among you because there will be no poor among you. And there's codes that set up that the poor can take certain areas of the land. These laws serve to reduce violence, reduce chaotic structures in society. There's another one that says, we looked at this last week, but I want to make a comparison. This is from Exodus. If you buy a Hebrew servant, he is to serve you for 6 years. But in the 7th year, he shall go free without paying anything. That structure is actually ambiguous. It's just without payment. Some people think it means that you set him free and then that's it for him. He starts his new life. But in Deuteronomy, it's expanded even more. And it says, if any of your people, Hebrew men or women, sell themselves to you, serve you for 6 years, in the seventh you must let them go free. Same thing, right? Can't be a slave all your life. 6 years, you pay off your debt, go free. But when you release them, do not send them away empty-handed. Supply them liberally from your flock, your threshing floor, and your winepress. So it changes from just, set the slave free. They should be free to go. To, you know what? It's probably going to cause slavery for them again if they have no way to start their new lives. Have you ever experienced this? I had a relative actually a few, who have been in prison and then you come out. And it's so difficult for them to start their new life again. They have no money when they get out, most of the time. And then they don't really have any prospect of jobs because with a record, it's hard to get a job. So you just are stuck. People go back to prison very often for economic reasons. Like you can't do anything to support yourself, so you end up just doing things that get you cash, and they tend to be illegal things. This is the kind of disorder, the kind of chaos that's trying to be avoided in some of these laws. Then we come to the section of tribal identity laws. Don't cut your beard, right, a certain way. Circumcise your males. Don't mix two kinds of cloth together. Wear tassels at the end of your garments at a certain length. Why? Why should we do those things? If you can define a culture's systems of normality, it creates a sense of belonging, it creates a sense of community, a love among the members, a safety from outsiders. It's a simple fact that invasion does happen, especially in the ancient Near East. We do this in our own time as well, though, right? That's why the threat of contamination by religious rites of other nations is so strongly denounced in the law. That's not why we do it in our own time. Those sentences have nothing to do with each other. My point is we create communities based on likeness. But anyway, we see the threat of contamination so strongly in the Old Testament. Don't marry other women from other countries. But why? Because they're just different than you. It always just follow up with you'll worship their gods, you'll get sucked back into the old, less just, less peaceful ways of living. There's nothing that can bring in chaos faster than tearing down old systems of tradition too quickly or aggressively. So that's what we see in the tribal identity laws. As you think about these laws, I encourage you to go through and read the law books, Exodus, Leviticus, and Deuteronomy. It's kind of a joke now in churches. Very cliche. I've heard it so many times and said it myself. Oh, you can't sleep? Read the book of Leviticus, right? It's boring because it's so monotonous, so many details, so many ins and outs of how a priest should dress, how they should construct the tabernacle, the way even the altar looks, the Ark of the Covenant, all these little details. It's like reading a building code, basically. That would be boring. But when you realize that it's not archaic, it's not barbaric, it's human, it's an attempt to provide order in the midst of chaos, then it becomes riveting. You see the depth of concern, the anxiety over being undone, and the creativity of structuring life around the ideas of peace and justice. It's pretty incredible. I've really enjoyed it. And when you step back and you begin to realize, these are the same concerns I have. These are the same concerns my church has and my family has, and they're the same concerns my neighborhood has, and they're the same concerns my nation has, and they're the same concerns that conglomerations of nations have. All humans are really trying to do the same thing. Create systems to balance the chaos with the order, so that the anxiety of the chaos doesn't consume us. Now, we do this on individual societal levels. And I have some friends who, one in particular, she's pretty vocal about it. She thinks she has no time for Christianity or the Bible or religion or anything. And she says the Old Testament's barbaric and stupid and misogynistic and all those things. But as I was reading some of these laws, I realized, it's pretty fair and balanced. If you want to see barbaric actions, look at some of modern Western laws. Eye for an eye. Man, that's not how wars go, do they? Someone does something to you, we're going to go times 1,000,000. Shock and awe, baby. We've lost a lot of the beauty of these laws. If someone tells you that, the Old Testament's barbaric and archaic, be like, ever heard of torture? That's a modern phenomenon. Out of control punishments, vengeance. Many of our modern attempts look more like Pharaoh throwing down more serpents in the midst of another serpent. Which brings us into the section about how to think theologically about these texts, right? We looked at them historically and critically. How do they arise? Well, clearly, it's just the path humanity has taken, and we see it more beautifully and fully in the Old Testament. But we know there's more than that to these texts, don't we? If you just look at them historically, critically, you always end up missing something. It's not quite full enough. So we think about them theologically, and we see how they fit into this human tendency to make the world around us, and that this tendency, though, comes from our relationship as finite beings to the infinite. In biblical terms, we call this the image of God. Humanity is the image of God. In other words, God is the infinite. We are finite. But we're able to sense this, and we relate. And in that relational space right there, that's where creativity happens, doesn't it? And so we seek order. And this brings us to Jesus, who, as a Jewish rabbi, interacted a whole lot with the law. If you remember the stories of Jesus, he's constantly having discussions with the groups of people whose job it was to either interpret the law or enforce obedience to it, the scribes and the Pharisees, other teachers of the law. At one point, as Jesus is in his Sermon on the Mount, it's kind of like Jesus' main treatise on the kingdom of God. The message he came to proclaim, he says this, "Do not think that I have come to abolish the law or the prophets. I have come not to abolish them, but to fulfill them." He goes on to say, "For I tell you that unless your righteousness surpasses that of the Pharisees and the teachers of the law, you will certainly not enter the kingdom of heaven." That can be easily misunderstood. The kingdom of heaven, the kingdom of God, a time when the threat of chaos crashing into order is gone. Perfect balance, perfect harmony among people and the earth. The anxiety of being finite, gone. So Jesus is saying, look, we're all trying to get to that same thing, right? But here's how you do it. You have to be more righteous than the scribes and the Pharisees. If you take a first glance at it, you might think, okay, hold on, let me think here. I know some of the history. The Pharisees were a group of people who believed God's blessing would come to them if they obeyed the law. The scribes were people who spent their entire vocational lives copying it down and interpreting it and commenting on it. Okay, so I have to be more righteous than them? That's literally impossible, right? That's their job. Is your job to live out the law of Moses? No, it's their job. You're never going to win that battle. But when Jesus says that your righteousness surpasses, exceeds in some translations, it doesn't mean that, the Pharisees keep their beards the right length because they trim it 2 times a day. You trim it 3 times a day. You'll be even better, millimeters closer to the truth of the beard. It doesn't mean do what they do and do it more, right? Exceed, surpass doesn't mean do more of what they're doing. It means rise above it. Move beyond it. Go past it. It's behind you. It's below you, however you want to say it. You are rising above it, moving even beyond it. Luckily for us, Jesus goes on to describe what this looks like. And so he says, one example is, the law says don't murder, right? Well, I say don't hate, okay? Because hate is killing in your mind, so you're still bringing in chaos to yourself. You're still disrupting order. The law says do not commit adultery. Why? Because the wife is the other man's property, like the law says? No. In fact, don't even put yourself in a situation where you'd be willing to tear a family apart. View the humanity of other people, even women. An added layer of humanity again. The law says eye for an eye, Jesus says. Why? So that violence won't spin out of control. Good idea. You know an even more effective way to bring order and to stop violence? Don't even hurt your enemy at all. Don't even get back in any way. That'll stop it right in its tracks. And we think, whoa, Jesus, that's tough stuff. Well, yeah, I suppose, because you're literally being more right than the law. The law was right. The law was good, clearly. But we can be even more right, more righteous. That's why the law is so valuable, because as we look at the underlying human condition that's spoken to in these categories of laws And as we look at the individual laws themselves, we can see that its goals and our goals and everyone's goals are essentially the same. But in order to achieve the balance of chaos and order that we all seek, we don't have to follow them out of fear that our crops won't grow. We don't have to follow them out of the idea that invaders will get us. But rather, we look at them like Jesus did. The law for Jesus functions like binoculars. Right? When we look through them, they're ideas of peace and justice, and we look through them, and it brings even greater peace and justice into closer view for us. Ideas of order and beauty that were just way too far away to ever conceive have been brought clear as we look through the law. It's in this way that the law for us functions. And it's in this way that we can reach out to that even greater form of justice and become even more righteous than it lays out. And in doing that, we can play a part in making our world a place where the anxiety of being infinite or being finite will not just become bearable, but even beautiful. We can do that for the world. We can do that for our friends and loved ones and our enemies. We can examine the law and see where its justice and peace have played out in its context and realize that it's pushing us to an even greater form. So let's embrace that together today. Use the law as binoculars. Look through it. Reach to the even greater righteousness that Jesus talked about. And together we'll move forward. Let's pray. God, which is this funny little three-letter word that we try to put all of the infinite into. You call us constantly. We feel it. We feel the pull, the tug to move closer and closer to a time of rightness, where we know that chaos won't crush in around us, that we can relate to our world in a beautiful, healthy way, even with all of our finitude. Continue to give us that grace that pulls us forward. Help us to look back, not in cynicism, not in nostalgia, but in an embrace that leads us to further peace and justice. We ask these things in Jesus' name, Jesus, who was our supreme example of this new humanity. We ask these things in his name, amen. You are dismissed. Go in peace.
In search of you, my darling.